Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. My name is Olivia Yurzart with Virtualization and Cloud Review, and I'd like to thank you all so much for joining us. The topic of today's webcast is how to optimize your Cloud TCO and move to the cloud with confidence, sponsored by Otava. But before we begin, I'd like to cover a few essential housekeeping details. First and foremost, we will have a Q&A session with our speakers at the end of today's event, so please take a moment to type in your questions in the Q&A box. Additionally, Otava has kindly provided some really great resources on the right-hand side of your screen, so please take a moment to check those out. And finally, today's webcast is being recorded, so keep an eye out for a link to the email to rewatch or share it with a colleague. So with that, I'd love to introduce Sydney, the Director of Marketing at Otava, to get us started.
Great. Thank you so much, Olivia. And good morning and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining us today for the webinar, How to Optimize Your Cloud TCO and Move to the Cloud with Confidence. As Olivia mentioned, my name is Sydney Diedrich, and I am the Director of Marketing here for Otava. And we've got some wonderful speakers on with us today as well. I'd like to welcome Bruce Appling and Chad St. Thomas and give them each a moment to introduce themselves. Bruce, we'll start with you.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Bruce Appling. I am a Senior Solutions Architect with Otava. I've got about 20 years of experience in the IT field, from admin to systems engineering. I've been working with clouds and high-performance virtual environments from the early days of VMware, and have had a focus on data protection, business continuity, and disaster recovery solutions. So glad to be here.
Thanks, Bruce.
Hey,
Chad?
everybody. Oh, yeah, sorry. Hey, everybody, this is Chad St. Thomas. I'm also a solutions architect at Otava. I've been in the cloud space for about 6 years, specifically in the data migration, business continuity side of things, as well as the VMware side of things when we're looking at our private infrastructure.
Thank you both. And now let's go ahead and jump in. So by now, you've probably been given the directive or taken an initiative to look into some sort of cloud technology for your business. And cloud has been a major buzzword in the industry for some time now, but only recently has taken on huge momentum. And in large part, this is due to the impacts of the pandemic, and we're actually hearing a lot of businesses who are building their IT strategies around cloud solutions and focusing on digital transformations. And in fact, according to Frost & Sullivan, about 75% of IT leaders are indicating that cloud is the most critical part of their IT strategy for digital transformation. But placing cloud at the center of your strategy requires some pretty detailed analysis in order to ensure that your organization and your environment is prepared for this digital transformation and really to understand how it will affect the bottom line. And when we're talking about weighing costs, we often go to the monetary, but we're not just referring to the cost to migrate. There are many costs, right? There's both direct and indirect, which we'll discuss today, and the cost of maintaining hardware, for example, accounts for about 60% of all IT costs. So considerations like competitive advantage are also important when thinking about TCO. And there's also the consideration of optimizing your cloud deployments with more than one provider. And all in all, there's a lot that goes into measuring total cost of ownership. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Bruce to go to discuss the best ways to begin thinking about TCO.
Yeah, thanks, Sydney. It's interesting, I think, from someone who's been in the IT field for a long time. We're often viewed as simply a cost center within the business, and as a result, it becomes a struggle to get funds for capital purchases and for even additional headcount and such. And these numbers really make a stark case for why the TCO needs to be seriously considered anytime you're making a change, or especially looking at a new endeavor such as a cloud migration. 60%. That's 60% of your budget being hardware. As a department that is considered a cost center, that adds up to a big number for most of us. And it's something that we need to be able to present to the business properly so that it's understood what the value actually is as opposed to just a cost. Some of the things that we should go ahead, Chad.
Oh yeah, I was just going to add to that a little bit because that's building into how people are, especially the enterprise customers, that even in the statistic here, that 93% rely on multiple clouds, and being able to specifically hone in on what type of cloud environment is going to work best for your workloads. Not only doing that, but being able to migrate those workloads over from an on-prem environment to that hybrid environment, and being able to get to that with like an actual efficiency that kind of builds into that second number in terms of being able to build that actual hybrid cloud strategy. So whenever you're making those moves, you're not wasting time and money that either could have been spent elsewhere, or more or less getting to your actual goal in a reasonable time frame.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what that means for us in the IT field, and especially if you're involved in making business cases and presenting, building budgets and presenting projects and changes up the chain to get budget approval, it really becomes incumbent on us to make sure that we are doing our full due diligence. We're making a full technical analysis of our environment, that we understand all the workloads that are present, that we understand the performance levels that are required for each workload, and the data sets that are critical, the data sets and workloads that are important, and the data sets and workloads that are less critical and less important, right, from a business perspective. And when we take that information and we can really start building into our total cost of ownership, instead of just saying, well, here's how much it's going to cost for this new hardware or this new application or this new software, and present the project, present the upgrades, present the endeavors from a total cost and return on investment. You got to remember, a lot of times we're presenting these projects to business people who are business minded and not necessarily IT focused, and IT have backgrounds in IT. So they're going to look at it more so from what's the value to the business, what's the return from the investment. They're not going to look at it just from, oh, it might make my job easier or it might perform just a little bit better. You have to be able to give that full picture. Some of the things that we often, I think, need to consider in those that goes into that TCO and that return on investment analysis are a complete scope of costs. Oftentimes, depending on what cloud you're looking at, whether you're talking hyperscalers or VMware private cloud providers, shared cloud providers, the cost model and the pricing model can be drastically different. And there can be a lot of hidden costs, or there may be a lot of inclusive costs, right? We often forget some of those when we are making our initial analysis, and we need to make sure that we're accounting for all of the inclusive and the excluded or additional cost items. Things like API calls and ingress, egress, and stuff like that are often easily overlooked. Firewalls, right, sometimes are included in some solutions and not in others. So we need to really keep our eye on what components actually add up to the cost in each cloud, and make sure that we really are performing an apples to apples comparison. We also need to look at capabilities. The capabilities of each cloud is drastically different. We'll go into some details about that. In some cases, some clouds offer much higher performance levels by default, and others lower. That can be both a benefit and a detriment on both sides of the scale. So you have to take that into account. Customization can be great to have simple to consume T-shirt size offerings or options, but it also sometimes means you're overbuying for a workload. That just because you need additional RAM, you don't necessarily need the additional compute that goes with it, or storage, and so on and so forth. So It's important to understand if you're overbuying on a T-shirt sized option as opposed to a customized option. Consumption, we talked about that a little bit in the cost, right? Anything that is going to build costs based on consumption is something that we need to look at carefully. A lot of times they can be very difficult to predict. We don't always have the greatest insight as to what some of those consumptions are going to be, but it is something we need to do our best to identify and quantify. And then finally, compliance. Depending on, obviously what industry or vertical you're in, you may have certain, regulatory compliance requirements that are included, again, in some clouds or not in others, or that are cost adds. So you need to make sure that you're taking those into account as well, and any other layered services that might play into that.
Yeah, 100%, Bruce. And that kind of brings into hyperscalers and those hyperscaler public clouds. And there is always kind of an assumption, at least bias for now today, especially with the amount of advertising you see, that hyperscalers are going to be your best choice financially. And maybe that private clouds and other things like that will give you the best performance-wise, but that's not always the case. With the example being, especially on the best choice financially, a big thing a lot of people don't go into their migration strategy or even their hybrid cloud strategies is thinking about the hidden costs of different hyperscalers. So not all hyperscalers are created equal. Some of them are going to have different hidden costs kind of wrapped in to different parts of their solution, like saying, at least like, oh, this is how much it's going to cost to run a VM per minute, but not also accounting for any data ingress and egress that might be coming out of that, whether it be from a site storing information for customer information or something as more in-depth as actually running databases within those multi-cloud environments and having a bunch of egress costs that come with that and unpredictable bills. And a lot of times, some of these different hyperscalers don't give you the best ability to see how much your costs are going to be and be able to track them in a way that's easily done for people like you were mentioning earlier that aren't as highly technical, that maybe are responsible for having to manage and follow these costs, but maybe aren't necessarily the most in tune with those hyperscalers' tools to be able to build that around that, which kind of gets us into the complexity part of it. Whenever you're going and looking at things, you see that, oh, this is how much my VM cost is, but not forgetting at the same time that, oh, there's going to be that performance cost that if for whatever reason this spikes up in performance need, then that cost is going to drastically increase, as well as the network ability, having the understanding that, oh, there's a lot of different things that are happening within my network that I wasn't tracking before because I was just running everything through an internet service provider. And now that this is being ran through a multi-cloud environment, I actually have to start figuring out how much data traffic is moving from these different parts of the network. And that figuring that out can be very complex and not necessarily the most intuitive thing to do, which again kind of brings us into that customer intimacy that, oh, I might understand networking from just a normal on-prem level, but when you ever start networking a bunch of machines in the cloud and how they actually talk to each other and then talk back to that on-prem environment, if we're doing a full hybrid cloud environment, there might be some things that aren't as easy for you to then process whenever you're trying to find it in either Azure, AWS, Google. That information might not be readily available and then might not actually be as the level of access that one might expect from a private cloud scenario, which is kind of where we get into the inflexible/performance. So the inflexibility of, having the keys of the kingdom on your on-prem environment to going into a hyperscale cloud environment, you might not have the exact same information vectors that you're having on your on-prem environments as you maybe thought you needed from that cloud that you're just simply not getting. And then the performance, as well as having network latency. If something happens to AWS, for example, where things go down and that affects your ability to take website orders or run applications within their containers, that can take you down for long periods of time, and that gives you extreme amounts of stress of having to be able to get those workloads back up and moving and getting that information back to those machines and those web servers or anything else that we're talking about workload-wise that might have been a part of that outage. And then to kind of lastly, just tie it all together with that risk, some apps must have to change to migrate. So maybe the way things are designed on an architecture level on an on-prem environment completely change whenever you move that to the cloud, having to pre-think what that risks are and having to develop and test until you get to that exact thing. That takes time, that takes money, and it also takes effort that maybe isn't necessarily accounted for whenever trying to get those things moved over, as well as that migration cost. Like I said, if a lot of times these things take a lot longer than we expect, then they cost us more money than they expect. And that's something that's always really important whenever you're trying to build a multi-cloud or hybrid cloud environment. And thinking about that as far as our TCO is concerned is very crucial and critical. That kind of brings us to a pretty easy and good example that anyone you've ever talked to that maybe is in multi-cloud might have a similar story. Like with NASA, they didn't necessarily account for their egress charges whenever they moved all of their data over to AWS. They thought very hard about it and like, oh, we want to move all of this data to the cloud because it allows us to get all of our data, hyperscale it out, and it sounds like a safe place that we can be able to keep all that data, which sounded all great and fine and dandy, but there were certain things that weren't necessarily thought about whenever they tried to pull all that data down and trying to use it for different things. And that cost, and at least for NASA, ended up being $12 million, and those egress costs alone wasn't something that they had thought about whenever they planned that migration. So whenever you're actually making those thoughts and considering, I want to migrate all this data to the cloud, making sure that the full picture of that migration is fully realized, because something as simple as just trying to get your data back could truly cost you.
Yeah, I've had a number of experiences with clients and prospects who have endeavored to move their workloads around, and often what they find, as this next slide is showing, is that the performance in order to get the performance that they need, sometimes in Azure and AWS or Google Cloud, they end up paying significantly more, right? They expect to be able to move their workloads to one of the hyperscalers and save money because their per VM advertised per VM costs are so low, and but then once they get there, the performance level isn't where it needs to be. So they have to start upgrading the CPU, they have to start upgrading the RAM, they have to start upgrading the storage that's underlying it. And this study here, it's a couple years old, but I think it still is very, very pertinent. You'll find that inclusive performance levels are far greater in most VMware kind of shared and private cloud providers, such as Otava. And don't get me wrong, I'm not here to say that all your workloads should end up in one location, right? There are very specific opportunities that I leverage, for our own workloads for Azure and AWS and so forth. What it's about is making the right decision for the right workload, making sure that you're getting the most out of your money and getting the best option for each particular workload. I was surprised when I first saw this that there was almost 5 times difference between performance levels across these 10 providers, and I was extremely surprised to see where Azure and Amazon in particular lined up in comparison to the average for most VMware cloud. This plays in part into the Tshirt sizing that we talked about earlier, right? Not all Tshirt size VMs are created equal, right? Here's an example from AWS, right? All 3 of these options here are 4 by 16, 4 CPU by 16 gigs of RAM, and the costs are drastically different, right? From if you look at the on-demand price from cheapest to most expensive, you're talking at least a 50% increase. And then if depending on if you do reserve instances and so forth, the cost can be drastically different as well. But how do you know which one to select? If all you know today is, I have my current workload has 4 cores and 16 gigs of RAM, how do I know which one of these to select? And will it perform at the level that I need it to, right? And oftentimes it doesn't, because especially, if you select the entry level one, we'll call it on the left, right? Oftentimes it doesn't, simply because it's leveraging slower storage, it's leveraging slower compute resources as well. The CPU and the RAM are typically lower tier, and so you need to take that into account when you're identifying the different workloads and their needs. When you're going through that TCO analysis, it's really very, very important that you have a baseline of what the performance looks like today and what it needs to look like, right, in order to support your staff, your customers, right, your business, and in order to ensure that when you do take on a project to move a workload to a cloud environment, that you have that baseline. You can test to see, am I getting the performance level that I need? I have one client, very, very large client, who was given a significant amount of funds from Azure to run for free, essentially, and then initially expected that they would be able to run for free in Azure for 3 to 5 years based on the funds that Microsoft had given them. They blew through all the funds in about 9 months, simply because they had to continue to upsize their VMs in order to get the performance level that they were accustomed to and that they needed to support their business, and because of the additional kind of hidden costs, right? The ingress, egress, the API calls, the read writes, and so on and so forth. So they, that's just one example. I've had other smaller examples, but where clients, end up paying more because they didn't do enough due diligence on what their workload needed and what the associated cost was going to be.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that I definitely hear all the time, especially when we're comparing VM types and things like that. Whenever you kind of go in expecting a certain level of performance, and then you end up getting another at a hidden cost of then realizing what that actual true needed performance level is and what the actual true cost of that maybe might not have been needed in the first place if you're moving that workload or moving that workload at a more defined cost structure, which kind of brings me into this slide, which, when it comes to that refactoring and rework complexity, there's a lot, obviously, that kind of goes into this. A lot of times, just the investment in development, testing, and the deployment of those replatforming and refactoring can alone already be more money than maybe the cost it would have been to just put it in a hybrid cloud environment that didn't have as much layers into it whenever it comes to the actual migration portion, as well as actually getting things redeployed and re-back up without having to rework that network layer. Because especially when you're moving into a multi-cloud environment, the different layers at which you have to rework your entire IT infrastructure is pretty lengthy process. If we're just talking a web application alone, you might have had that web application split between 3 servers before, but now we're getting into having to refactor those into different containers and then having separate databases for each of those containers, because that's in multi-cloud a lot better to run multiple SQL servers in order to be able to do that. That would eventually increase your costs, because if all these SQL servers have a lot of in and out coming between all of those different new vector points you just added, those could be the hidden costs that maybe you wouldn't have seen because on your on-prem environment, you're just expecting that 3-server outlook, and now you've got 6 different servers with all individual SQL servers that now need to interdependent run, and refactoring and reworking all of that alone could cost you so much time, because like we say, the investment in development, testing, and then that deployment would kind of almost outweigh that ability that you were looking to actually save that money in the long term. And there's other methodologies that can be used in order to get those sorts of results.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is that all that even assumes that you have the expertise, right, or access to somebody with the expertise to go through that refactoring for each and every one of your applications. Oftentimes, that's not the case in my experience. I deal with a lot of clients who really have no idea, really, to be frank, right, of how to refactor their existing application to be cloud native, and that's where people think they need to go by default, and that is where you can gain some cost benefit, right? But there is a significant knowledge gap of usually for a lot of clients in where you are today to how to get to a cloud native architecture. And quite frankly, in a lot of cases, for a lot of applications, it's just not worth it. You spend more time and money in resources and in personnel or in outsourcing that work than you save, right? That's when you get back to that ROI, right? Is it really worth it to the company to spend that money to refactor into cloud native architecture? If you're not going to get a payback for 7, 10 plus years or more, right? So that's something that needs to be significantly considered.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because it even brings me back to thinking about, especially with the way things are in the hiring realm today in IT. If I'm going to move all of my stuff to Azure, well, okay, and then you got to find an Azure admin, and in today's day and world, that's easier said than actually truly done. And there might be more experts in other fields that already are within your infrastructure that either if you need it, okay, we're expanding, so we need more techs in one thing, that might be easier to find than, okay, let me, for myself, reinvent the wheel and then hire somebody. And you're also kind of hoping that when you hire somebody as those that, that they actually can follow through with what they're telling you they could do. Because if you're fresh and new into it, how do you validate other people's skill sets of being able to manage these new workloads that you've now gotten yourself into, right?
Absolutely.
And then that kind of builds off with this slide even as well, is just talking about the different global surveys for actually migrating applications from on-premise to native cloud apps. And the actual rework cost for those is, for 1,000 VMs, you average 3 years, $1 million, which is a lot, especially when a lot of times there are other methodologies and other things that you can do to move yourself into a hybrid cloud environment that maybe won't take as much time or as much effort. And then, even the one next to it that's estimated to be $1,000 per VM. So something as simple as, maybe you don't necessarily need to move your on-prem applications over. It might be something as simple as, well, let's move, instead of having a on-prem RDS system, maybe having our VDIs and other things in another hybrid cloud environment that might, lower our network latency and give us a better ability of our on-prem infrastructure use for the applications that we were scaling up now, and being able to rework it from that perspective rather than trying to go to the application level and redo all of that. So to kind of add some more color into that as well, is the actual time it actually takes to do all of this if you were to try and go through that multi-cloud. And a lot of times, even for tenants that I've worked with that are going from maybe a private cloud environment to multi-cloud, just simply because that buzzword has been, repeated to them, like, oh, well, we're going to go try and move into that actual cloud. Getting that actual migration to occur sometimes can be extremely lengthy, and the strategy built upon that migration itself can take the most time. So that it might take you a year to get to the planning phase, but that migration phase might also take another year to 2 years, depending on the size of the applications that you're moving. If you're moving a major application database, you're never going to want to actually be down. So moving that database is going to have to be very highly structured and very highly thought out, and pre-thinking all of that and building that strategy and the time and the resources that it takes to be able to do that might make that timetable that you might have expected, oh yeah, we're going to do this in a year or two, to 4, 5, 6 years down the road. And by that point, the migration cost and the investment that you put in to actually try to make that happen might not even be worth it whenever, maybe one thing like the NASA example, something was left out of that equation. And when that movement was actually made, maybe there was a hidden cost that wasn't perceived on top of the additional migration costs that maybe weren't initially set for. Having different events, like if you were planning to move to the public cloud before COVID, I assume the migration from that environment went from, maybe 1 year to, oh, maybe we just now migrated because of all the different challenges that COVID provided. These are things that we can't expect that do happen. And, that availability can stretch that time way, way farther than maybe anticipated originally.
Yeah, and this right here kind of draws that picture. And these numbers are all pre-COVID. These, I think, are 2019 when the study was done. I will say most cloud most cloud migrations, especially those that are attempting to refactor into cloud native, tend to have a stall point. And especially if there isn't sufficient planning and knowledge base around refactoring and the application level, most cloud migrations tend to have a stall point where they can't get past, and that's where they end up stuck. And 95% of the time or greater, at that point, it's more expensive than if they had just done nothing. You'll see here from this study, right, you can get a significant reduction in true cost of ownership, but notice the ROI here is 171%, 7 years down the road before you finally get a positive return on your money. That's assuming that you're doing things, probably correctly, right? You're taking the low-hanging fruit and just lift and shifting, right, VM to VM. You're refactoring the most intensive, the highest impact applications, and taking the time to do those in a cloud native format. And then after your migration is complete, right, which is already, almost 2 years down the road, or almost 3 years down the road, I should say, you then take the time to go through all the right sizing processes and to set up scheduling policies of, these workloads only need to be up, during the day on weekdays, 8 to 5 Eastern time or Pacific time or whatever, right? And shutting stuff down, auto scaling, right? Taking advantage of auto scaling, taking advantage of trying to make the most out of all of those cost savings opportunities, as opposed to only getting hit with the increased kind of blind costs that you don't really know what they're going to be for usage-based stuff, and also taking advantage of those reserved instances, right? 7 years is a long time to wait for return on investment. I know when I've dealt with our controller on what we need to make a case for a project. 7 years is not in the scope usually, because by then you're already looking at having to do a hardware refresh, right? If it's a hardware project, right? So from that perspective, so it may or may not be worth it to the business, but it's something that's easily overlooked and overestimated or underestimated, I should say, on the duration and the level of effort that is involved. We often get from above, from boards or C-levels saying, "Oh, we need to go to the cloud this year," and there are easier ways to do that. But if there hasn't been significant planning, or if you don't have partners that can really help enable you and help you, especially with the low-hanging fruit and moving the workloads kind of lift and shift, you'll really have a problem doing it in that kind of time frame, right? Whoever fails to plans to fail, right? You gotta go into it with a good plan. You gotta spend lots of time planning. Probably, if you're really going to do a full refactor and try to go cloud native on everything, you're going to spend a year or more probably planning before you even push the first button to actually start the process.
Yeah, but then you got to test it.
And then you got to test it. That's right.
Sure that it's good. Yeah.
So going back to some of our earlier points on what really needs to go into that TCO, from a cost perspective, right? Both Capex and opex are crucial here, right? You can't look at it as what's my hardware cost, and I'm gonna amortize that over 5 years of its life, and compare that to the direct month-to-month cost of my compute and storage, right? There's going to be significantly higher opex in managing and owning hardware along the way. In some cases, you're going to have costs going into the cloud, right? Depending on which cloud you choose, right? If you're trying to refactor and go cloud native, you're going to have additional opex and capex there as well to do the refactoring. which you won't have if you're going with, a lift and shift VM to a VMware private cloud or shared cloud somewhere, right? You need to really compare things at both levels, not just pure hardware versus pure month to month. If you take into account, I've done a lot of TCOs with clients. If you take into account your true Capex and your true opex of both doing things on-prem and moving things, even just lift and shift, without doing any refactoring, even just lift and shift, if you really do a like for like, including your human resource costs, I've never seen it come out cheaper to keep stuff on-prem and do it yourself. Now, if you can go through and do stuff and do your refactoring and get stuff to cloud native, you can recoup and gain even more benefit from a cloud migration.
Yeah, and that, I think, just to add to what you're saying, Bruce, is that's where it comes to the expertise and finding someone that has the ability to help you figure out what the best course of action is to make those most efficient moves to the cloud and giving you the full capabilities of whatever environment that you're in, so that you can maximize how much of your Capex savings that you're now having, as well as trying to minimize your opex costs, at the same time pulling all of that together with, again, optimized pricing and performance that kind of pulls it all together for you.
Absolutely. Capabilities, right? You have to make sure that you're going to get the performance level you're expecting or that your business needs out of each workload. And that's going to take a lot of technical analysis of your existing environment, baselining, comparison, and testing in new environments to make sure that you're actually getting that. In most cases, if you do a lift and shift to a VM cloud provider like Otava, you will see an increase in performance, almost every time from an on-premise, just because of the way we build our cloud modules, right? They're built to be high performant, highly redundant, and provide that benefit to everybody, not just to those who are going to pay, higher for the higher T-shirt size, let's say. But if you don't know what you need going in, you don't know what you're missing once you get there.
Yeah, because that's the key part of even you just checking it off of here as a customization in terms of what you just said.
Yep.
That whenever you're doing all of those things and moving over and doing that hybrid format, finding the most efficient ways to do so. So there could be simple changes that can be made in the environment that, whenever you're talking to either Bruce or myself, that we find, maybe doing this might be more efficient, that customization alone might, increase the performance level that you were looking to actually achieve. And maybe that actually is what pulls everything together to make your environments more scalable rather than trying to go completely public cloud native.
Yeah, oftentimes clients don't really fully know what their performance level looks like today, and don't know what they need, and as a result, lift and shift is about the only option, and that's fine. But when you work with a partner like Otava, right, we're happy to help you migrate, do a lift and shift into our cloud, and then we will actually work with you to right-size those VMs after it's migrated, right? We know ahead of time that a lot of the VMs are going to come in oversized, and I can't tell you the number of clients who have discovered after the move that they only needed half the resources or 3/4 of the resources that they thought they needed, just because they were still on older hardware perhaps, or maybe their storage was actually the bottleneck and not the compute, right? So once they got it onto Otava's infrastructure, they were able to customize that down to smaller sizes and save actually a little bit more than they expected.
Yeah, and that also probably for a lot of customers brings some of their consumption down, as well as allows them to pull some of those cost vectors together that maybe make more sense than they were running some on-prem environment. They were blowing through a bunch of electricity just because they were rolling older equipment, right? Yeah. And that older equipment just wasn't giving them the performance levels they were looking for.
Yeah, and that's actually one of those cost benefits that oftentimes gets forgotten, right? You no longer have the electrical consumption. You no longer have the cooling capacity requirements and the cooling capacity electrical consumption, right? You can get away from having to provide your own power redundancy, right? From whether it's generators or battery backups or so on and so forth, right? You can get away. Those are costs that oftentimes are completely overlooked when looking at a full TCO analysis.
Yeah, totally. And I guess that kind of brings us into our recommendations, right? And I guess at the top it kind of ties it all together for the slide as a whole, which is just to de-risk your cloud migration so that you can accelerate your time to value. And then, like we've kind of been reiterating over and over again, is just future-proofing that investment so that there isn't additional migration costs or additional unforeseen hidden costs as running in maybe a hyperscale public cloud, or kind of pulling all of those different factors all together so that you make an actual good move to the cloud or hybrid environment cloud, and not having as much to be concerned about because you've done all your pre-work and done all of your investigating and development and all of the other things that are needed to making sure that happens. So just kind of going through some of this list here and kind of building upon that. Just understanding those requirements and migration strategy, just kind of like me and Bruce have been talking about, that pre-planning phase and making sure that simple things like network egress costs, or having things like, oh, this is a more efficient move for your workload than moving this entire environment lift and shift. That being a huge part of, like, again, the second point, conducting a true TCO analysis, so finding those different points that maybe are super important to making sure that whenever you do actually do your cost of ownership, that you're including different factors of that capital or that operational expenditures that maybe weren't accounted for previously, that having somebody help you with that TCO analysis might uncover and make light of different situations that maybe you weren't thinking of previously.
Yeah, and grab that low-hanging fruit, right? Kind of start there, get your feet wet with the easy moves, the easy lifts and shifts first. But we really have to look at this from a more business-minded standpoint than I know I ever did when I was in an engineering role. I often was just collecting prices and saying, this is what's going to cost you this project. But that's not going to fly especially in today's world, where cost is extremely crucial, right? Everybody's trying to do more with less. Everybody's trying to be cost competitive. We have to adjust the way we approach things as IT professionals as well. The way we approach getting budget, the way we approach defining the IT staff, the IT team, the IT department, not just as a cost center, but as a business partner, right? With the managers and with the other staff, to ensure that we're looking out for the best interest of the company as well. We're looking at the true cost. We're looking at the value proposition, and not just at, here's how much money I need to spend.
Yeah, totally. And that's kind of where, for me, you start talking about the operational complexity, that having the reskilling or the retooling is like, if you make some changes, maybe the current staff you have isn't able to support some of the changes that you made, as opposed to, like you're mentioning, the low-hanging fruit. Maybe making some of those low-hanging fruit changes doesn't really require much from your staff to change. And it might just be small little things, as opposed to adding maybe an entire complexity to that environment that no longer can be self-service, and increasing your operational costs, or more or less making it harder for you to fully make use of the staff that you already have, right? And making sure that you make changes that make the most sense for your business.
Yeah, don't try to bite it all off at once.
Yes, exactly.
So Otava, obviously we are here to partner with you. We are here to help you enable your business, right? As IT professionals, we want to help you show yourself to be a benefit and an asset to your company. And we offer a number of products We offer a number of consumption models, contractual models. You can go in shared cloud, private cloud, reserved instances. I'm not going to go through all the bullet points here, but Otava's goal is to be flexible in order to provide you the solution you need. And we do leverage, we're not just a private cloud provider. We're not just a data center. We're not just a shared cloud provider. We leverage the hyperscaler public clouds with some of our clients for the workloads that make sense, right? And we save some money for our clients by putting the workloads that don't need to be there in shared cloud or in private cloud. Otava's real goal is to be your trusted partner for all things cloud. Right? We provide disaster recovery, business continuity, data protection, and of course cloud services itself. We provide compliance and security services, WAF, firewalling, right? Managed or self-managed. So our goal is to be flexible and to offer you the tools to make your cloud migration or in your cloud environment the best that it can be. I think that is it there, unless you have anything to add, Chad?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I was going to add on top of that is letting Otava help you figure out what those different things are, especially when we're talking, what's best for private, reserved, or shared clouds. Like me and Bruce and there's other solution architects we have at Otava have been doing this a long time, and a lot of the situations that you might feel like you might see yourself as unique. Maybe we've seen something either really similar or maybe we've actually seen the exact same situation, and we can help you bridge some of those gaps and helping you pull all those different things together so that make this actual change or whatever changes that you need a little bit more comfortable.
Great. Thank you guys so much, Chad and Bruce. We really appreciate the insight and the great recommendations that you've made. I want to take a step back for a quick moment and just introduce you to Otava. Bruce gave you a great introduction there, but for those of you who may be unfamiliar, Otava is a cloud solution provider focusing on compliant custom cloud deployments. We offer hybrid cloud, co-location, backup as a service, disaster recovery, security as a service, and managed services and professional services. And the great thing about us is that our solutions are backed by industry-leading compliances like HIPAA, HITRUST, PCI, SOC, and ISO. And we're actually very proud to be one of the first cloud providers to ever achieve HIPAA compliance certification, which is a really great point to note if you're in need of HIPAA compliance and things like that. And we're often asked what sets us apart from our competitors, and our answer is always the same. And as Bruce kind of noted, we want to be a partner with you. We want to ensure that we're matching the right workload to the right cloud. And at the end of the day, it's our people who make all the difference, where we take a very hands-on approach. We're not a 1-800 number. We're not a cookie-cutter provider. We are your personalized cloud service provider, and we're here to support you through every step of your digital transformation. You will get a real person live on the phone every time you call us, which is something that we're very proud of. We actually offer personalized project management for easy onboarding and smooth installations, and we do not discriminate based on the size of the business. We provide 24/7 by 365 tech support. Again, call us any time of the day, and you will be connected to a live person. And we provide our staff with continued opportunities for education and certification. So what that means is you are getting a certified specialist to support you and help develop solutions that meet your needs. And these our people have been educated in the capacity to help you meet the correct deployments for each solution. And we're actually on the leading edge technology and use best-of-breed components from globally recognized brands. So our data centers are built with solutions that are completely best-of-breed and backed by superior technology. And our SLA is 99.99% uptime, which actually has led to our customer satisfaction rating and retention rating of 95%. So we're very proud of that, and we're very excited to be able to partner with you and understand your unique business needs if you should need to reach out to us or have any questions. So please feel free to reach out to us at learnmore@otava.com if you want to discuss your specific solutions. But at this time, I'd love to hand it back over to Olivia and invite you to put any questions that you have into the chat.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sydney. We do have some great questions in here, so let's go ahead and jump right into them. The first one, let's see, is do you provide consultation for planning, co-location, and/or cloud?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. The answer is absolutely. That is actually a lot of what I spend my time doing. We do it often as kind of a precursor to orders, right? To sales opportunities. We don't necessarily offer for fee consultation, but individuals like myself and Chad sit down with every prospective client that comes to us and really try to learn their business struggles, really try to learn what they're trying to solve and help them identify how Otava can help solve that. So, and we do offer, we do that for co-location, private cloud, shared cloud, public cloud, data protection, right? All of the services that you saw listed. We will sit down and do that same type of conversation with you and exploration in order to try to identify how we can help you solve whatever business problem you need to.
That's incredible. I imagine that makes quite a difference with the various folks you work with.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Next question here, is staffing an expense I should consider when thinking about TCO?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one?
Apologies. Is staffing an expense I should consider when thinking about TCO?
100%. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. Because oftentimes staffing is thought of as a sunk cost, right? They're like, oh, well, they're already on staff. But in this world of always needing to do more with less, right? More responsibilities, more labor effort, and we're not hiring. Most companies aren't hiring more IT staff, at the same rate of the increase of workload. And so the ability to do more work with less people, or more work with the same number of people is more often the case. Sometimes we worry as IT professionals that if I outsource something, that's going to cost me my job because that's what I do. No, what it really does is it allows you to move on to something else, right? And hopefully something more important and higher level and more business impactful than clicking the same button every day, right? So 100% staff cost definitely needs to play a part in every TCO model.
No, that completely makes sense. And I love the enthusiastic 100% from both of you. That's wonderful. Perfect. Okay, next question here. How is Otava managing the supply chain issues and shortages caused by this pandemic? This is something that we've seen affect our ability to get hardware and is affecting our TCO. I'm sure lots of folks relate to this one.
Yeah, and absolutely. I can probably touch on it first, and Bruce can probably build on it. But and it kind of reiterates from our earlier conversation, which is just pre-planning, getting ahead of things rather than behind. So thinking about growth at a long-term phase and getting things prepared, or at least understanding the time and the flow it takes to be able to scale up and build out, and always being prepared, at least. For our infrastructure, as a good example, we're seeing storage requirements go up pretty drastically. So we've prepared for that so that we're ready to deploy at any time or any moment that we need to. But that's kind of, in TCO in general, that's a big part of it, is that pre-planning phase and making sure you're ready for the future.
Yeah, for Otava specifically, I will say that we always maintain excess capacity, right, for growth in our cloud, compute and storage, and so while we certainly are impacted by the same supply chain issues that everybody is, we have the room for growth already built into our environments, and we continue to, and we've adjusted to try to buy further ahead. And for any hardware that we have on site for future growth as well.
Yeah, I'll even add to that and say that we've been actively communicating with our vendors and companies that we procure from to ensure that we are on top of those delivery dates and understand how far out ordering is and delivering versus delivering of the product. To make sure that if we ever do hit capacity, but to Bruce's point, we don't anticipate that, but to ensure that if we ever do need to order additional hardware, that we are on track. But I will say that if this is something that is affecting you and you're considering kind of switching to the cloud instead of ordering that hardware, come talk to us. I mean, there's definitely customers that we're working with right now who are in the same exact boat, who are working with delivery dates that are 6 months out and have projects that need to be deployed tomorrow. And it's just, pre-planning is great in theory, but it's not always the reality. So if that's the boat that you're in, reach out, and if it's not us, if it's a different cloud provider, there's people that can help and prioritize those deployments for you.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm sure that is going to help quite a few folks. I know that's hurting a lot I'm sure on the line. Okay, next one here. How do I get my executives to start thinking in TCO versus price?
Yeah, I kind of harped on that a little bit, I think, throughout the presentation. It becomes incumbent on us to present in their language and not the other way around. Right? We need to start thinking more like business owners, which we are, right? We have to own our own IT business, right? When we have to think about it in those terms and in that way, and we have to present to them a fully hatched solution and presentation of this is what the actual cost is of this solution, and this is the value it brings versus A versus B, right? So I think it's just a matter of us presenting it in those terms, which is not what they're used to historically, right? They're used to just getting a budget of how much we want to spend every year or every quarter or whatever, right? If we start presenting our solutions as with TCOs and as comparative costs and as return on investments, they will start thinking that way as well. They already think that way. They'll start thinking about IT that way. They already think that way. Let's not be mistaken.
Yeah, and I was even going to add to that in terms of just like asking the right questions, like resource costs and operating costs. Like there's a big part of if blah 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 server fails today. Kind of what we were talking about earlier about the supply chain issues. Well, how long is it going to take to acquire new hardware? And okay, well, our disaster recovery plan kind of gets us through, this time frame, but it doesn't necessarily get us long term if it takes 6 weeks or 6 months to get the kind of hardware that's required to get you fully back up and running. And having those questions answered is probably a huge part of making sure that TCO is fully thought out, as opposed to just, oh, that's how much it's going to cost me to do that, as opposed to, oh, this might be something I need to consider down the road.
Work with your controller. Work with your controller as well. Your controller is often the best resource from the finance side, or somebody on his team, right? On the controller's team that has the insight as to how the company views, ROI and such. Work closely with them whenever you're looking at large projects and large expenditures, especially.
Those are some really good tips. And I think on that note, we are out of time. But I really appreciate both of you sharing your insight. That was incredible and very helpful today. And of course, we want to thank our audience for attending today's presentation, sponsored by Otava and presented by all of us at Virtualization and Cloud Review. Folks, please do keep an eye out for the recording over the next few days. I know there was a lot of great information in here, so you'll want to give it a rewatch or even share it with a colleague. And of course, like we mentioned earlier, there are those resources on the right-hand side of your screen, so go ahead and check those out. We look forward to seeing you on the next event, and we hope everyone has a great rest of your day.